So, good morning, Iceland, USA. Good afternoon, China and Singapore. Welcome to Tencent Dialogue, a place to learn from the great mind of our time. My name is Sam Tsai, Senior Expert of Tencent Research Institute. I will serve as your humble moderator for this event. Today, our topic is new models for tackling climate change and food, energy, water challenges around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has crippled a large part of the global economy, maybe changed the world permanently. At this difficult time, the world is facing more challenges than ever. Food, energy, and water is the future of humanity and an essential issue for the sustainable development of the planet. In the context of the pandemic and climate change, what are the challenges? What are the new ideas and models to tackle those issues? What do we need to do to get prepared? We will investigate those issues in our talk today. Today, we are honored to have invited two distinguished guests to join the dialogue. Honorable Ólafur Grímsson, former President of Iceland, Chairman of Arctic Circle, and also Mr. David Wallerstein, Chief Exploration Officer of Tencent. President Grímsson and David, nice to have you both here. First of all, please allow me to introduce our honorable guests first. Dr. Ólafur Grímsson was the President of Iceland for 20 years, from 1996 to 2016. Elected 5 times in nationwide elections, he now serves as the chairman of the Arctic Circle, which he founded in 2013 with various Arctic partners. Prior to becoming president, he served as Minister of Finance, Member of Parliament, and also as the first professor of political science at the University of Iceland. Welcome, President Grímsson. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. David Wallerstein is currently Chief Exploration Officer, Senior Executive Vice President of Tencent. David drives Tencent's participation in new technologies, business areas, research collaborations, and ideas. He has worked on building Tencent's international footprint and entrance into new business areas since 2001. Particularly relevant to today's topic, I think he's the first person in the world to put forward the idea of AI for food. We are going to hear from him soon. Welcome, David. Today, we also have some few experts from China Academy of Agricultural Science, School of Environment, Beijing Normal University, China Institute of Water Resources and Hydropower Research, University of Michigan, Renmin University, and also my colleagues from Tencent Research Institute. Sorry that I cannot introduce one by one due to limited time. They will engage in Q&A session. Welcome, all of you. I think today we will proceed like this. I will invite President Grímsson and David to take turns to make opening remarks, each for 5 to 10 minutes, flexible. Then I will guide the dialogue on few issues. After the dialogue is the Q&A session. Our online experts will raise some questions and give comments. I think the point is that we will give our guests enough time to have in-depth and detailed discussions on food, energy, and water issues. I think it will take roughly 1 hour and 30 minutes to complete the event. So now with this, let me invite President Grímsson to have his opening remarks. President Grímsson, Vincent Legaster, please.
Thank you very much. And indeed, thank you also for inviting me to participate in this very important dialogue. I know I don't have to remind the people of China that we are now living in a new type of mega cities that humanity has never seen before. But what many people don't realize is that now, for the first time in human history, over half of the global population lives in cities. And soon, within 20, 30 years or so, 2/3 of humankind will live in cities. And these will be huge cities. Some of them have not even been created. And most of them will be in Asia, in China, in other countries in Asia, in Africa, and some in other parts of the world. And the big challenge that we face on the planet is how are we going to heat and cool, bring water and food to these mega cities without destroying the climate of the planet. We already see in my part of the world the evidence of the melting of the glaciers, how the Arctic sea ice is gradually disappearing, how the big ice sheet in Greenland is also melting. And it might sound that my part of the world is far away from China and Asia, but all of this is closely linked because the melting of the Arctic sea ice creates extreme weather in China and Asia, and in recent years has caused enormous destruction to China and other Asian countries. And the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, if only about a quarter of the Greenland ice sheet melts, then the sea level everywhere in the world, including the coast of China and other Asian countries, will rise about 2 meters. 2 meters. That means that all the coastal cities in Asia will no longer be livable. And one of the reasons why the ice is melting in my part of the world is the energy system that is being used, not just in Asia, but in every country in the world. But particularly as the population of Asia grows, the energy system in Asia impacts the melting of the glaciers, thereby creating extreme weather patterns and also rising sea level. So therefore, we have to move aggressively over to clean energy in all these new cities, all these new mega cities, in order to prevent the disasters of extreme weather patterns and rising sea levels. But we also have to make sure that we produce the food on the planet without destroying the general environment that makes the planet livable. But let me also remind you that the ice is not just in the north or in Antarctica. The ice is also in the Chinese neighborhood, in the Tibetan Plateau, in the Himalayan region. We sometimes call it the third pole. And there are thousands and thousands of glaciers in the Himalayan region. And all the big rivers of China, India, and other Asian countries, they originate in the Himalayan region. It's sometimes called the water tower of Asia. And your foremost glaciologist, Yao Tandong, who heads the Tibetan Plateau Institute in Beijing, has predicted that at the present rate of climate change, most of the glaciers in the Himalayan third pole region, definitely over half, will have disappeared by the end of this century, even before. And this will have great impact on the water systems of China and Asia, of your big rivers, on your agricultural production. So my message today to all of you is, for the first time in human history, we are not only living in times where over half of the global population lives in cities, but we are also living for the first time in an era where the energy system, the water system, the food system, and the climate system in Asia and in my part of the world close to the Arctic is all interrelated. And unless we realize this relationship and create energy policies, water policies, and food policies that recognize this interrelationship, we are heading for a gigantic trouble in the decades ahead.
Oh, thanks very much, President Grímsson. I think you generally introduced us food, energy, and water issues in the world that we are facing today. Next, David, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to say it's an honor to be speaking today with President Grímsson. There's probably no better authority in the world to be talking about these issues with us today. So it's a great honor to have him, and also our other distinguished guests from around China, and of course the people watching the show. It's so great that you're taking an interest in these very important issues. I talk a lot about food, energy, and water, and I know this is a new concept, and some people are wondering why food, energy, and water, why few? To me, it came out of a need I felt for more people to understand climate change, but more from a perspective of what causes climate change and how are we going to be affected by climate change? Because many discussions around climate change often talk about, for example, driving cars, fossil fuel cars, and then we get a sense that the atmosphere heats up, and then we're thinking about sea level rise in the future. This is kind of like a shortcut understanding of climate change. And to me, what I felt was missing from kind of like, let's call it the first generation of understanding about climate change, was that it was missing a lot of the complexity on Earth. But how do you introduce all this environmental, ecological complexity to people, where you're kind of saying you have to understand everything on the planet? I felt that at the end of the day, the most important relationships for people to think about and understand would be around food, energy, and water, and the relationships between each other. And the idea is this, that our food needs, our water needs, and our energy needs are actually some of the most critical factors contributing to this climate change around us. Everything from the type of diet that we choose, like do we eat a lot of meat or no meat, or the kind of energy we use to heat our homes. Many people don't know, for example, that perhaps 50%, quite commonly, 50% of a national energy budget is either for warming up a space, like in an office or a home, or cooling the space, like in a hot part of the world. Just to meet the human body temperature needs can be up to 50% of a national energy budget. So these needs around energy, food, and water, these are what's driving climate change. But then when we have climate change factors coming into play, this affects our ability to secure food, make sure our agriculture continues to be as productive as possible. It affects our water availability. Places in the world where we used to depend on water for food maybe now have droughts, or they have too much water. They have excessive amounts of rain, and that also has an impact on the fields. And of course, energy as well, this need to shift to renewables. I think the kind of moment we're facing in history is one in which the educational models we have, the intellectual paradigms that we use to understand the world, are basically insufficient to deal with what we're facing. And I think we need to start introducing more models where we're actually synthesizing different factors. So how do we think about how food, energy, and water relate to each other? That's the importance of this term, few. Let me just give you an example of what I'm referring to. Something we found a few years ago with one of our portfolio companies was that in many cases around the world, farmers are over-watering their plants to get productivity, okay? They provide their plant with too much water. The goal of the farmer is to have the best possible harvest, to have maximum profits, use the least amount of resources, and have the maximum yield. And in this pursuit of that goal, we're finding that often farmers are perhaps providing up to 40% too much water than they need to. Now, the problem is they don't have good tools and data to recognize what is the ideal amount of water. That's the importance of technology, like artificial intelligence. We can talk about that later. But what was powerful to me was thinking, okay, if we need to increase our yield of food on planet Earth for humans and spare ecological damage, because agriculture does cause ecological damage, we actually should be using less water. Now, the benefit in that is that we can actually save that water for other purposes. In fact, for many countries, up to 40 to 70% of national water usage is often for agriculture. So just by saving the amount of water that we use to ensure that plants are more productive, we've solved another problem. We've solved the water crisis problem. And furthermore, many energy systems are dependent on water, like hydropower or even nuclear power. Water is a critical element for many of our energy systems that we have on Earth today. So this is how these factors are all related to each other. We need to learn how to think in a multidisciplinary fashion. And it actually gets more complicated than this, because as we know, now we're in a global COVID crisis. So probably 6 months ago, if I was to try to write a paper or do a talk on the relationship between infectious disease and energy security or energy policy or food security, people would probably not be very interested to hear that kind of an argument. But around the world, as we've been dealing with COVID, this has become a headline topic for many, many countries with many different kinds of circumstances. How does this pandemic affect food security? Whether it's preparation of meat, whether it's how trade is changing because of dealing with this pandemic, whether it's the price of fuel, for example, on the energy side. We need to get better at anticipating these kinds of relationships as humanity. What's happening right now is that we're discovering these things after they happen. An expert who may want to alert people to these relationships may not get much attention. People haven't been trained to think about these things in this way. And then we find ourselves falling into problems with almost no preparation, no scenario planning, no dialogues around it. This is the challenge for humanity going forward. We need to build the intellectual tools to synthesize reality, the objective reality, the scientific reality that's happening around us. And of course, you're going to have geologists, you're going to have people who are biologists, and people who are experts in forests and oceans. And there's so many sciences to be an expert in. But we're also going to have to get better at synthesizing the relationships between those. What are the relationships between forests and oceans, for example? How does that affect our planet? What happens to the global weather system when too many trees in the Amazon, too much of the jungle of the Amazon is cleared for agriculture? Does that affect the global water cycle? Yes, there's more and more evidence that that is exactly what is happening. How do we synthesize these various fields while also appreciating that we need domain expertise? We need to know more and more about what's happening in those forests, more and more what's happening in the oceans, but also being able to synthesize. So by introducing the term few, it's also an attempt to encourage an exploration of these areas, and we're just starting off with 3. I have written other articles, some have showed up in China, in fact, where we talk about few shes, as in female, SHES, which is another attempt to kind of broaden the perspective to 7 factors beyond 3. And the truth is there's even more than that. But anyways, this is something that I hope we can discuss more this afternoon.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I know that you consider the food, energy, water as an integrated concept. And very interestingly, I heard one of the speech of President Grímsson, I think it's many years ago. He says that ice, water, energy as a triangle. I think 2 of you are in line with each other. Okay, next part is with after your opening remarks, I'd like to start our dialogue. To warm up, I think I will raise some first individual questions. First to President Grímsson. You have been driving the Arctic Circle, which is already an important forum for not only the Arctic affairs, but also for environment protection. Could you please introduce a little bit more about this organization to us? Thank you.
The origin of the Arctic Circle was my realization 20 years ago that the northernmost part of the world, which some people call the top of the world, the ice-covered areas, Greenland and around the Arctic, which had for centuries been very remote, almost completely unknown to scientists or public in Europe, America, not to say Asia. This part was becoming crucial to the future of the planet. And it was in the beginning very difficult to get people to realize that their future, whether they were living in Beijing or Shanghai or Japan or Korea or Singapore, was related to what was happening to the ice in these remote places, then people didn't realize how big part of the planet the Arctic is. If you add it all up, the Arctic parts of Russia, America, Canada, and the Nordic countries is almost the size of Africa. And that's also a mind-boggling thought. And during the Cold War, the military tension between the Soviet Union and the United States made this a no-go zone. So there was almost zero science, zero political cooperation. So 20 years ago, I started to bring myself in my first years as president into various Arctic meetings. They were at that time very small, very specialized. So I realized about 10, 12 years ago that if humankind, if people in Asia, Africa, Europe, the Americas, were going to realize the great importance for their future of the Arctic, we had to create a big global platform. I sometimes said to people, we need the Davos of the Arctic. Davos is, as everybody knows, an annual gathering where the big business leaders, political leaders come together. We needed the Davos of the Arctic where political leaders, presidents, ministers, scientists, business leaders, environmentalists, indigenous people, they all came together. And where people from Asia and Europe and Africa were welcome, as well as the Arctic nations. And to cut a long story short, we succeeded in doing this. We launched it in 2013, and now we have every October in Iceland, the largest annual international gathering on the Arctic with over 2,000 participants from more than 70 countries, and China has participated every year. But then we started a few years ago to have what we call Arctic Circle forums in other countries. They are more specialized and smaller, but still bigger numbers. They have been in Shanghai, in Korea, in Singapore, in Washington, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. And the next ones will be in Berlin, in Tokyo, or in Abu Dhabi. So now we have succeeded in creating a big international platform where all the major countries of the Arctic, of Asia and Europe come together, where scientists, business leaders, political leaders, environmentalists, activists, indigenous people talk to each other in a very constructive way. But let me also say that the Arctic Circle is also a new model of how we cooperate in the 21st century. The old model was that if you represent a government, you get a priority. Sometimes only formal representatives of states have the right to speak. You can see that in international gatherings where the ambassadors or the ministers sit with the name of the country in front of them, and nobody else can speak. Even at the United Nations, we now in the 21st century live in a world where the informed young people, where the student activist can actually be more interesting than the old diplomat in terms of what they say. So when we constructed the Arctic Circle, we also introduced a new model for cooperation in the 21st century where everyone who comes, the young activist as well as the president of a country, has the same right to speak, has the same right to stand up and ask a question, has the same right to create a session. We invite different partners from all over the world to put forward proposals. And once we accept them, they have full authority over their session. They can decide the speaker. The Arctic Circle is the only big international platform today where you can do that. The World Economic Forum in Davos, other meetings, they still are organized on the old model. The old model is your position decides whether you can speak or not. The Arctic Circle model is if you have something to say, you can speak. And that is also a very important model because we now live in times where we have to listen to everybody. We have to listen to everybody. And I am very pleased not only that the Arctic Circle has succeeded in creating this huge international platform, but also we have proved that the new model of the 21st century actually works.
Okay, thank you, President, for the introduction. I know the forum was held in Shanghai last year. My next question is to David. As the senior executive of a leading internet company in the world, instead of talking about AI, big data, cloud computing, Internet of Things, blockchain, you often talk about a few. Just now you explained, but why is so important this issue for you? What's your original idea about this? Can you share more the background with us? Thank you.
Great. So thank you. So I think this is actually a very, very important question. You have probably asked the most important question, which is why. And I think the why is really important for everyone in their lives, for every business. When you start a business, why do you do Tencent? Why do you do a coffee company? And I think the answer for that is often much deeper than saying, well, why do I work in business? Because I want to make money. I want to grow the economy. I think when you want to do something for a long time, like I've been working in Tencent for 20 years and it stays exciting every day. The reason it stays exciting and interesting is I think we take a very different view about the why do you do this. When I started, even before working with Tencent, it was very important to me that I wanted to work on global problems. In fact, I came to China in 1994 because I was very interested in China as a developing country. So, 26 years ago, China was a very different country then. I wanted to understand China better. And I had been reading as a young person, I was probably right around 20 years old at the time, that this China country had a lot of people and it could grow. And I was fascinated by this idea. So to learn more about China, I went there and I, studied Chinese, and I didn't actually expect to make as many friends as I did. But that initial desire to go to China started by wanting to do something important in the world, wanting to maybe myself play a role in helping countries to get along and work together and see how I could contribute to social value. But as a young person, I didn't know exactly how you can do that. And then did many things in China. I met our executive team in the year 2000. I started working with our investor called the Naspers Group in 1999. And this was a time when the internet was developing. And with the internet, you actually had for the first time private investment in telecommunications, in content, in entertainment. Up to that point, all of these options were state-run. So as we continuously built on the Tencent mission, we're always thinking about, and let me talk about myself, how can the technologies that we develop have as much social value as possible? Because we fundamentally care about people. We fundamentally care about having a more peaceful world, a world in which you can see the quality of life improving for people. This was a main slogan of Tencent for many, many years: improve people's lives with the internet and the quality of life. So how can we make someone laugh after a long day at the restaurant, a long day, driving people around as a driver, a taxi driver? How can I have 1 hour or 2 hours of my time and have that be really enjoyable time? Maybe I'm connecting with family and I want to do it at a very low cost. We always had to think about our mission from the perspective of the value it was bringing people. And then if we do a good enough job, we should be rewarded with having a business model, like someone spending 10 RMB on an item in a game, because as people in the audience know, almost all of our products are free. You only pay if you value something so much in that experience that you're willing to pay a little more money. So to do good in this kind of model where you're essentially always giving all of your services away for free, you have to provide additional value. And to do this well, year after year, day after day, and you want to be the most competitive company doing this in the world, you're going to run out of gas unless you fundamentally care about people, because you have to think about their needs. You have to empathize with them. So for me, when I started thinking about food, energy, and water, it really started from a period of time when I was thinking more as an executive of Tencent, what more can we do to meet the needs of people? And I actually started with human health. So I was thinking, okay, well, when you look at all of Tencent services, our entertainment services, communication services, these are all things that interact with the brain. And most of these experiences go through the eyes and the ears. And then you have your fingers at the keyboard or on the mobile phone, and you have this interactive loop. And of course, through these services, we try to provide the best possible service, and we try to understand our users. But I was thinking, okay, what about the entire human body? The health needs that people have. How could we use the technologies that we know as really a computer science and telecommunications company? That's what we do with the internet. We combine software and telecommunications, and we bring these experiences together for our users. How can we have some unique value to add as a newcomer to these spaces? Because we're not going to be a company that knows things about pharmaceuticals and things like that, but we know our discipline as computer science. So we started thinking about these issues, but actually as Tencent, when we start thinking about something, we often learn by investing. So we do a lot of early stage investing, seed investing, to support founders and also to have a dialogue with them as we're trying to help them grow as a company. We can also learn about their discipline. It could be an aspect of healthcare. It could be a medical diagnostic or something like this. As we started learning more about healthcare, and myself learning more about healthcare, I started thinking a lot about diseases like cancer and other diseases. And when your goal is to fundamentally reduce the probability that a human being will have cancer, you have to start thinking about, well, what are the things that cause cancer? What are these carcinogenic factors out there? And I started thinking about environmental issues like water that's polluted. You know, you have lead or chemicals. There's so many things, pesticides, fertilizers, almost anything that is man-made that gets into water isn't good. So this actually triggered my initial interest in water, was just, you know, what are the risks to humanity with water that's becoming more and more polluted? Thinking about plastics, kind of related to water, but it goes even deeper into the oceans and plastics that break down. And then, you know, is it going to get into our seafood and our fish? And thinking about air quality, so on and so forth. And when I started thinking about environmental factors, then I started going a step out from there, thinking, okay, so why do we have all these problems with plastics? What are the alternative materials? Or what is the situation with water on Earth? Why are we having these issues where some areas have less and less water? And then I started seeing that actually there is so much work that should be done, research that should be done that isn't being done in these spaces. And so many of the disciplines weren't talking to each other, like I was saying in my earlier remarks. So all along, what I'm actually describing here is how I've been approaching a problem. And I've actually been talking more and more that I think this can be a strategy for CXOs. If other companies or even you know, cities or other organizations wanted to have a CXO, I would say a critical principle of being a CXO is you start with the problem first, right? Now, our tool set in Tencent is technology, but you start with the problems. You say, it looks like we have these human health challenges. It looks like that we have these food challenges. What can we do with what we know, our expertise, computer science, telecommunications, building apps, to add something new to attack these problems? And what else can we do? We also know how to invest. We could be a helpful investor, even if we don't have the skills or the tools that are directly applicable to that problem. So I think now when we look at Few, for example, from a Tencent perspective, having been working in this area, learning about the challenges, and then experimenting with technologies, we can see quite clearly that there's a huge amount of value to be added to these areas just in the space of, let's call it computer science and telecommunications alone, otherwise known as, you know, a subfield of that is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence actually maps to this goal setting process that I was talking about really well, because that is the whole point of an artificial intelligence system, or particularly a robotic system, is you're trying to optimize a certain outcome. And you can, you get more and more data that you can use for intelligent decision-making to actuate against that targeted action. So if you want to have the cleanest water quality possible at the lowest price, this is a perfect question for an artificial intelligence solution, because you can get more and more data from more and more types of sensors. You can quantify how each factor in nature or that you're measuring contributes to that clean water. And then you can say, great, optimize for clean water and reduce all the costs, all the energy, any chemicals, anything that goes into that outcome. And this is what companies like ours is actually, we are in a perfect position to develop these kinds of technologies. And we don't have to always do it as Tencent alone. That's sometimes a misunderstanding. I think it's well known that we do a lot of investments around the world, and there's hundreds of investments, but often we can just support other types of initiatives with, for example, academic institutions, research institutions. There's so many ways that we can be supportive as a company to do this. As an example, to show you how far we've come with learning about artificial intelligence, about 3 years ago, we started supporting a program in the Netherlands with a university called Wageningen, WUR. It's, they're known to be one of the best universities in the world for agriculture, certainly a leader in Europe, very, very famous. 2017, I didn't know anything about this university. I read about them, and I was so fascinated to learn about them. I just started sending them emails quite randomly, and usually you don't get a response. That's how the world works now. You know, people are busy. But somehow they did respond to my email, and they said they'd like to meet, and I flew over to the Netherlands from Silicon Valley to meet them. We came up with an idea. It started with a question: can artificial intelligence make food production in greenhouses a game changer? Can artificial intelligence outperform human beings in a greenhouse? We wanted to show an AI contest or a competition, kind of like these other AI competitions like AlphaGo. There's some of these famous competitions where it's the humans versus the AI. And then at the result, you know, it could be chess or other games. And usually the outcome of those tests is that we're afraid that the AI will now hurt us in the future. I said, can we structure a contest that shows if the AI is successful, that we'll actually guarantee ourselves a better future, that we can all have more food at a lower cost with less resource use. Anyways, here's the point. Yesterday, we announced the second competition that we did. Here we are, middle of 2020, 2.5 years, 3 years after I first contacted them. All 5 AI teams outperformed the human growers in Wageningen, according to a rigorous scientific process. It didn't matter so much what your AI strategy was, and some AI teams performed a lot better than others of the 5, but every single one outperformed the humans. Some of the teams were twice as profitable than the human growers. And the human grower team by far had the most waste. So it's all started with a question. There were no relationships between Tencent and the university. It started with this question: can AI make a difference in the world of food? And then you have a process where you structure that. And then you harness your tools, not just only Tencent, but experts around the world, to leverage AI, to develop AI, to talk about what's possible. And it takes a little time, but then you can show a result. I think this is a healthy process that can be applied to many, many types of problems. Start with the big goal, because it's meaningful, because it matters on Earth. It has an implication for everyone on Earth, rich or poor. We all need healthy food, and we need more and more of it, right? We need solutions for that. And then we make the technology do for us what we need it to do for us. We develop that technology to solve our most important needs. It doesn't just happen. It's not just a marketplace of ideas where everyone's doing something and something's working, something don't. Sometimes we have to say, we must succeed in this area. We don't just wait for the market to react and someone else to do it. We have to make sure that we are creating those solutions. They must happen. Let's focus on it. Let's get it done. And I think this has been a clear, a great area for Tencent to work on. It totally applies very centrally to our AI strategy, and we're learning so much from it in many different ways. So this is an example I wanted to provide to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for sharing this inside story with us. I think this is from the bottom of your heart. This reminds me of the old Chinese saying, never forget where you started. Your mission can be accomplished. 不忘初心，方得始终. Okay, just now give us an example how to use like AI for agriculture. I'd like to move to energy. What does it take for our planet to drive a sufficient energy transformation to mitigate climate change's coming impacts? I think the question is to both of you. I think President Ólafur, you can go first.
Well, the notion 5-10 years ago, even before, was that clean energy, replacing fossil fuel, coal and oil, would take maybe centuries. Clean energy, wind, solar, even geothermal was a niche phenomena, kind of boutique phenomena. But now, in the last 5 or 10 years, we have seen an enormous progress, which has made clean energy, every form of clean energy, geothermal, solar, wind, hydro, more competitive, cheaper, in economic and business terms, better than the old system of fossil fuel or even coal. You can take my country. When I was growing up, over 80% of Icelandic energy was imported oil and coal. I grew up in a big part of Iceland where there was zero clean energy, zero. Now we are #1 in the world in terms of clean energy sources. 100% of our electricity and our house heating comes from clean energy, hydro and geothermal. If you look at our neighboring countries, Norway, Scotland, Greenland, the Faroe Islands, you look at this triangle in the northern part of the North Atlantic. When I was growing up, all these countries were fossil fuel, oil-dependent countries. Now all of them, Norway, Greenland, Iceland, Scotland, Faroe Islands, over 60% of their electricity is produced by clean energy. Different form, some of them wind, some of them hydro, some of them geothermal. But they all go more than half in clean energy. And we are seeing in Germany, in Britain, and also in the Middle East. I have worked with Abu Dhabi for a long time. I was there a few months ago. You go into the desert, you see these huge new solar power stations, some of them built in cooperation with China. And the price that they are offering for producing electricity is cheaper than the traditional fossil fuel. So you are now seeing oil-rich countries like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, going aggressively into clean energy. Take Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia does not go aggressively into clean energy, solar and other firms, by the middle of the century, Saudi Arabia has to become a net importer of energy. And why is that? Comes back to my opening statement. We now live in a world where 2/3 of the population will live in cities. And like David said, more than half of the energy needs, more than half of the energy produced is for heating and cooling buildings. And if you live in the desert, you need a lot of air conditioning. That is why Saudi Arabia will need to import energy if they don't heat and cool their cities with clean energy. China should get a great credit for how China in the last 10 years has become the global leader in almost every form of clean energy. If it wasn't for the Chinese contribution to solar and wind, electric cars and other forms, we would not have solar and wind with the competitive prices as we have today. When I was talking about these issues 10, 15 years ago, everybody saw China as the problem. Now China has become the solution. China is now pointing the way for the rest of the world, how you can indeed become a global leader in clean energy. And Iceland has been privileged, and I as president, to help China to move from coal-driven heating systems in cities over to the geothermal system like we have here in Iceland, and thereby making the Chinese cities clean air cities. Because quite frankly, to heat and cool cities with clean energy is not just an environmental problem. It's a health problem. It's even a life and death problem. Last year, 7 million people died in the world for urban pollution. We talk a lot about the deaths from coronavirus. And it might be brutal to say it, but so far the people who have died from COVID-19 is a small part of those who die every year from urban pollution. The fossil fuel-based energy we use in cities is more dangerous to human lives than the COVID-19. I know it's a startling statement, but it is a fact. So when I say to people, we need to replace coal and oil in heating and cooling cities with clean energy, it's not just because of the climate. It's not just because of the environment. It's in order to save lives, to allow children to grow up without lung diseases, allowing people to live longer and a healthier life, because it doesn't matter how rich you become. You can become a Chinese millionaire, even a Chinese billionaire, but you still have to breathe the polluted air, like the poorest of the people have to breathe. But the good news is that the technological progress in clean energy has now been so successful that moving over to clean energy is good business. It's even better business than the oil and the coal. And the countries I mentioned in the beginning, like Norway and Iceland, 100 years ago, when my parents were born or brought up, Norway and Iceland were among the poorest countries in Europe. They are now among the richest countries, not just in Europe, but also in the world. And one of the primary reasons for how Norway and Iceland have become so rich and affluent and people live such a good life in our countries is moving away from the old system of energy in terms of our own countries over to the new clean energy system.
Okay, thank you, President Grímsson, to share with us the successful story of Iceland. My question is, what's your view on clean energy? Do you have some new ideas?
Yeah. But let me just build off of what President Grímsson was just saying. Part of the challenge for everywhere on Earth is how do we move to renewable energy systems, and it can feel like a huge task, especially I think that the size of the task or the challenge that one perceives, I do believe in part relates to the amount of territory they're trying to manage. So if we could just even use Iceland as an example, it's an island in a country with a smaller population than, let's say, China or the United States. But I think we can learn a lot from Iceland's experience, because at the end of the day, when a nation thinks about making an energy transformation, to me, it's the aggregation of many local strategies. So each region in the world has natural attributes that will be very suitable for generating energy from these natural resources. It could be geothermal energy heat under the ground that's accessible. It could be by having abundance of water for hydropower. It could be solar for the hot, dry parts of the world that maybe have very little water. Usually everywhere in the world has something that can be offered. And then there's even nuclear, but nuclear needs water to run the reaction as well. At least the current designs of nuclear reactors need water. And I think sometimes when I find there's a debate about energy sources, sometimes the bigger picture, like I'm referring to now, gets a little bit lost. So for example, in the United States, I think there's a pretty strong argument that says the future is nuclear. Like if we do not embrace nuclear energy, we're not going to be able to make this necessary energy transition. Those who oppose nuclear energy don't know what they're talking about. And it's kind of like, do you believe in nuclear or do you not believe in it? But I think the reality or the range of choices we have as humanity is a lot more diverse than that. For example, why would anyone ever go to Iceland and suggest that they should have nuclear power? They've shown that they actually have more than enough hydropower and geothermal power. But it could very well have been before Iceland had its energy transition in its history that people would show up, probably people who want to sell nuclear power plants, and say, you need to build a nuclear power plant or else you're not going to be able to make the energy transition. The point I'm trying to make is that there are many options available depending where you are around the world. It's not one size fits all. And in fact, for the right kind of design and the right kind of conditions in a part of the world, maybe nuclear is a perfectly good option. You wouldn't want to put a nuclear power plant that requires water to run. Again, you're having heat running, over a boiler, steam, that creates force, and then a generator. That's part of the nuclear reaction. You can't do that in a desert. You need a lot of water. And if you have so much water that you could just build a hydro plant, again, it may not be in your interest to have nuclear. So you kind of need to think about what type of energy source is the most optimal for my region. What natural traits do we have that can help us meet our energy needs? So there's this one question, which I've just been addressing now, which is really about power generation, okay? When I talk about geothermal versus nuclear, this is all about the power source. Then you have another issue, which is more national in nature, not so much local, but more national, which is grids. If you're going to have a national strategy, you need to think carefully, do I invest in grid technology? With the right kind of grid and the right kind of architecture, you could potentially have a region in your country or even offshore, in the sea, where you're generating massive amounts of power, like a big wind farm, like is being planned in Europe, in Northern Europe. The ocean, Denmark's very involved in that. With the right grid, you can move that energy throughout the country, potentially. And you can invest in that. So to me, there's this question, if a nation state or a region wants to have a strong grid strategy or a weak grid strategy. With a strong grid strategy, if I could use that term, you can actually move around large amounts of energy across a region. And therefore, you could have parts of the country that are providing the energy needs for many other parts. If you have a weak grid, then you need to have much more local power generation, okay? So again, this is kind of trying to tackle this question of how do we make this green transition. There's a third point, though, which is entirely new and entirely novel. And that is similar to what we've seen artificial intelligence do, as I just mentioned, in greenhouses to optimize for a certain targeted outcome. I believe there's a whole new, almost you can call like a revolution of applications that can become available, which can better tie in, the supply and demand of energy. So you're basically trying to optimize the use of green energy by timing and sequencing your energy needs that use more and more of your energy to the availability of green energy in the grid. Let me explain this a little more. So right now, the way most energy systems work around the world is very obvious. When you turn on the light goes on. When you plug in your electric car, the charge starts to trickle. When you turn on the air conditioning in your house, the air conditioner goes on. When you plug in the refrigerator, it's always going. But actually, many of these processes could be timed for when there's an abundance of green energy to minimize the use of fossil fuel energy in a system. So you can actually say, when we have more wind power or solar power during the day, that's when we do our heavier loads. That's when we use more energy. So you can actually reduce the need for these spikes. Let me give you an example just to confirm people understood what I'm saying. Can you imagine China with everyone owning an electric car? So maybe that's 1 billion electric cars in the market, and everyone gets home at 6 p.m. in China and plugs in their car. What's going to happen to the grid? You're going to have a massive spike. You know, your energy level was here and then it just went to here because everyone is pulling down a huge amount of electricity at the same time. You're going to have so much power generation capacity in your network to meet those needs. Versus you actually time you space out the timing by which the charging is done. So some people get home at 6, plug it in, it charges at 6. Some people at 7. Some people it's 12 midnight. Some people it's 4 in the morning. Your goal is to make sure everyone is fully charged by, let's say, 7 a.m. But you can actually intelligently space out the timing to have a more even load on the grid, right? You space out the grid because you can have everyone charged perfectly in the first model, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. everyone charged, but you needed 100 or 1,000 nuclear plants to pull it off, versus a much lower number that was distributed over time, and everyone got the result they wanted, which was to have their car charged fully by 7 a.m. That's just an example of how you could use intelligence to marry the demand, the electric car that needs the energy, with the supply of green energy in the society. So I think there's many, many things we can do. When you look at the issue from a high level, it seems impossible. But when you break it down step by step, every step is more and more tangible. And finally, you can sometimes discover countries like Iceland in the world with too much energy. That is, they have an abundance of energy, and they would actually like to welcome energy-intensive industries to Iceland, the right kinds of industries doing positive things in the world, to actually use some of their abundant energy, because with renewable energy, you can sometimes have more than 100%. And it's marginal cost neutral, meaning it doesn't cost you anything more to have that additional energy. It's because the wind was blowing, that's nature's gift, or the sun was shining really well that day, you have more energy. Of course, that energy could also be stored as hydrogen or something else. But the exciting thing, when we think about this future that we are heading towards, is we can find scenarios where there's more and more nations like Iceland that actually have an abundance of energy and could think about how can we apply that abundant energy towards further applications that improve human life. Maybe we should grow more kinds of food, maybe more fruits, fun stuff, you know, whatever it may be. We can around the world increasingly have a luxury of asking that question. We actually have too much energy right now. What can we do that's positive for humanity to take advantage of that? It's an exciting future that we're heading towards if we can get it right.
Thanks, David. A lot of inspiring ideas. So I'd like to ask a follow-up question. Sometimes easier said than done. You know, sometimes you want to change the world, but the world does not allow you to do so because of policy barriers, interest group, consumer awareness, and so on. So what are the challenges to implement those new ideas and new models? I think for both of you, this question.
5, 10 years is the world is very open to new ideas. If you think about the transformation that Tencent has created in China, or Google and Apple have created in the United States and elsewhere, basically these ideas, these companies came out of nowhere, and they have transformed the world, and they are still doing so. And we are living in times where we see the globalization of new ideas moving at a speed that nobody could have dreamt about before. Yes, we still have states on the basis of the old diplomatic political model. yes, you still have ignorance or hostility or opposition. But the good news is the track record of new ideas being able to transform the world is now so strong that I could even say there is no barrier out there that is going to stop this big river of new ideas to transforming the world. Even the fact that we are talking today in the way we are talking, and there are people listening in China and other parts of the world, and there are people who can ask us questions. This would have been impossible 10 years ago. We now look at it as the new normal. The ideas that David was describing about artificial intelligence, if he had made that speech 10 years ago, most people would have said, this guy is crazy. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah, I mean, he is just dreaming about something that is not going to be a reality. The fact that I can use my phone as my own media company. I have my own media company in my phone. This was impossible. As David said, you can now have an electricity grid where every home can sell the extra power they have in their home. If they have solar power on the roof, or they have a windmill outside and they have extra power, they can sell it on the grid. So every household can in fact become a power company, which is a strange notion because we were all brought up in a world where only the state created power companies. So I think the track record is new ideas are running forward in a big river, and I don't see anything out there that is going to stop.
Okay, thank you, President Grímsson. Very positive view. Big ideas is a big river. So how about you, David?
Yes, thank you. So, the question is, how do we actually implement things in the real world? Because there's often great ideas, a lot of theories, but how do we actually see action? This is actually, I agree, it's a real problem. And I truly feel that we sometimes have so much information, so much social media, even some of our education. It doesn't help us sometimes just to do the most obvious things. For example, let me tell you what I think the answer is, because it's too obvious. You have to set your goals, first of all. But I am actually kind of amazed in situation, getting opportunities to meet with people around the world, sometimes related to governments or organizations, whatever, where the goals aren't very specific. I mean, let me give you an example. So if you say, I want to do something about climate, that's a good starting point, but that's not actionable, right? You have to decide, great, you want to do something about climate. What is the exact thing that you would like to do? Are you going to change your coal-fired plants, shut them down? Is that one strategy? And then you're going to replace them with another kind of energy? That's something specific, because then you could have a timetable for shutting down the coal-fired plant and a timetable and investment for new energy. But it has to be very specific. And I find in some cases, it's clear what a region needs to do or an organization needs to do for one or two things. But when they start getting out of those one or two things, it's often less and less clear. But the first thing is to be really clear on what you are trying to do. Be specific and take the time to specify those things. The second thing is also, I think, very obvious. You need to appoint responsible people to get something done. This is something that I feel that corporations like ours do particularly well, because we realize in our own work, if no one is managing the WeChat product today, when problems come up, they are not going to get solved very quickly, and we have a very bad situation on our hands. And we operate a service 24/7, so we don't just have one person responsible. We have many people responsible for many different functions. But sometimes, again, you may have an initiative by a region to make progress with something. Maybe it's we want to improve water quality in our city. Who's the person responsible for that specifically? Great. So often that sounds easy, but I find in practice, it's often not solved, which is why I'm raising it here. It sounds very obvious, but the world often, we find it's messy out there, and often there aren't people responsible. Finally, I think once you have your responsible person for solving that challenge, they need to be available, reachable by the private sector, by businesses, by researchers, individuals, investors. You need to be able to find them, to interact, to propose a solution to them. We find in the case of many of our startup companies that we support, that they have a lot of trouble just getting to tell someone about their solution, which maybe us as investors or supporters, we think could be perfect for a city or for a region or something. And we ourselves might also struggle to find a contact over there that is working on that. Maybe it's an air pollution problem or a water problem or whatever it may be, or something related to agriculture. We don't have the contacts either. No one has the contacts. So how are we going to get in touch? Meanwhile, the startup company has 6 months of capital. They need to get business or else they're gone. That cool strategy doesn't have enough time to live, even just to show someone in a region that needed it the most that it was available. So you have this market failure happening around the world all the time. To bridge the market failure, I've been suggesting a bit here and there that it would be very helpful if, for example, city governments, municipal governments, whatever they may be, organizations, you should have strategic operating budgets to meet your needs, whatever they may be. Say you wanted to tackle air pollution in your town. First thing, you start with the problem first, like I've been talking about. You don't assume you know what all the solutions are. You say, I want to solve air pollution. I am open to hearing the best ideas. But we have a time limitation. We want to get all the best ideas in within 6 months. And then for the ideas that win, we have a budget available for those companies who we want to work with. Maybe we trial the technology in our city a little bit. Maybe there's a $500,000 budget available, $200,000, $1 million. The point is that it's something to get started, and that money can be transformational for a startup company because now they're earning money. They have a reference point, they have a reference customer, they have operating cash flow. A lot of good things happen from that. And the point I make, if I ever get the opportunity to talk to someone about this, is that these aren't, when you think about a city or a state, these aren't large amounts of money. 500,000, I'm not saying it's small, but they can usually afford it. And it makes it can make a huge impact on making progress. So I think I'm a big fan of applying what we've learned as a business to also regions solving problems around the world, kind of like a startup. You start with a little bit of capital, you know what your target is, you evaluate different solutions, and then you scale up those that are really having an impact, and the $500,000 project becomes a $5 million project or a $50 million project. I think we go with goal, practical steps to engage and learn, and small budgets that build confidence, and then you have the confidence to do the really big investments that are truly solving that problem that you set out to solve. It's very straightforward.
Okay, thanks, David. I think we are a little bit running out of time. So actually, my last question in the dialogue session is that, could you please use one sentence to deliver your message in terms of field? What do you want to say? Who want to go first?
One sentence, right?
Sorry, I didn't get what you said, what you were asking us to do.
Sam, can you repeat? The suggestion is to provide one sentence.
Yeah, the most important message you want to deliver.
About few.
About a few.
I would say be clear on your targets and get to work step by step. Focus on it, focus on action. Nothing should be holding you back. There's so many people that want to get involved and help, but set your goals, put together a team, someone responsible, and get to work.
Okay, thanks, David. President Grímsson?
My core message is we now live in a world where the future of China depends on the future of the Arctic, and the future of the Arctic depends on the future of China. And unless we realize that we're all connected in this way, we will destroy the planet, our home, in the coming decades.
Okay, all right. Thanks, President Grímsson and David. I think it's very detailed and in-depth discussion on field and very inspiring with new ideas. I think some of the issues we still didn't have time to address, but I'm sure that it will be addressed in the Q&A section. The next session is the Q&A section. And our guests and online audience online, if you have any questions, please turn on your video and raise the question directly. Please introduce yourself first. You can also raise the question in the chat room. Okay. I say the Professor Xu Qinghua from Renmin University. I know that she is an energy strategy expert. So Professor Xu, please.
Thank you, President Ólafur and David. It's my honor to attend this discussion. And again, every activity held by David is always full of large quantitative of information, and which is very helpful for my work to set the goal and get to work for push the clean energy. So in echoing both your sayings, I want to share what I have been doing in the latest years. Firstly, I have been doing my best to push the Belt and Road green development. So this year, I'm working with the NDRC of Chinese government to list those green development projects the demonstration list for the whole world to see what we can do and what we need to do. This is one thing. Second is that when the President Ólafur, you referred to the clean energy. To my understanding, that the clean energy that means that the whole life cycle for energy should be clean. And what I'm worrying about that even the EV, for example, the retired battery, we cannot make them those retired battery to be recycled, used, and those batteries, and also including the solar energy, the panels, after they are almost 20 or 25, the use, the life, how to recycle them, how to deal with them, or they will become the environment and challenge. That's the two things. So I just finished the field studies in Zhejiang province, and I finished a report and submit to the Vice President of our CNP, the standing committee about the retired batteries, how to recycle the use. The third that I'm also invited our CNPC, which has been doing lots of the investments in the Belt Road, and also our oil and the gas industry, which are very worrying about the the oil price. So we are going to have a very large online the meeting conference, and to release initiative how to keep the balance between renewable energy and also the traditional energy, to push the clean energy and the renewable energy to be development more healthy and more quickly. The last thing I have been doing, and we're working together with the Columbia University of US, because we don't like to see the situation that both two countries will derail, especially in the climate change issues. So we are going to have an online conference on 15th June about the green dynamics through the renewable energy, and also other green development. For example, just the David referred to his very ambitious FEW, which I totally agree, and also want to together push the green agriculture, for example. So that is what I'm reported to you, and echo the David's worry after setting the clear goal how to get to work. So being a scholar, what I have been doing these years. So then I have two questions, David and President Ólafur. So how do you think that the world, the most barrier from the world's energy big transition? And so many people say that it's the political barrier. So how do you think about? And another thing is that for the Iceland, do you have any green stimulus for the COVID-19, the economy, the recovery? So what's Chinese government we have been thinking about a lot? Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Nice to see you, Professor Xu. Yeah, so what's this barrier to making a renewable energy transition? Obviously, for any issue like this, there's going to be a lot of factors. But let me talk about something that I think is actually quite important. I actually think the bigger barrier is not so much about making the investments in new power generation approaches. So say your town or your region needs more energy, more electricity. I think if you were to evaluate wind and solar and coal, this kind of stuff all together, and you decide on wind power, I think that's going to be these days, a much less controversial decision than doing a new coal-fired plant. You're not going to get a lot of pushback, right? I think the bigger issue is really this question of what do you do about the existing assets, and do you do an investment in a new facility? So if your goal is to shut down something that already exists and do more investment in a new type of facility, there's obviously a question, do we have the money for that? Do we invest in the capital to do that plant? But then also a question, what do we do about the existing facility? It has owners, it has people that work there, it's kind of part of a local culture, it's been there for 50 years or 100 years. How do we handle this event? And that can be a very difficult decision. Culturally, it can, in terms of jobs, it can, and then also for the owners of the asset. They built that asset wanting to get the return on investment as long as possible. And now when you say you're going to switch that, that changes the game for them, doesn't it? But then what we have to realize is that those existing assets, let's take for example, a coal-fired plant, it has an ongoing operating expense need in the fuel. Like that coal-fired plant doesn't run. In fact, it'll shut down pretty quickly if it fails to have coal continuously fed into it, usually a long conveyor belt from a port or something like that, where the coal gets shipped in. And if that stops working, you're not going to be able to continue with your power supply. These existing assets require an ongoing operational expense. So basically, a community says, we don't like the capital investment in new assets. That scares us, and we owe it to other people to let the asset go as long as possible. But we'll all of us accept the ongoing costs of bringing in the fuel, often having to import it. That requires foreign exchange. And then, of course, we're also going to accept the ongoing problems we have with pollution, whether it be air pollution or things like that. So, it's not easy in any case for a city, just from a pure economic perspective. And I'm kind of answering this question more as a businessman than someone who cares about our planet and the ecology. I'm just saying, if you look at it from a pure business, in one case, you do the upfront investment, and then you end up with very low marginal cost energy, like wind or solar. When that wind is blowing, you're not spending more. Or you stick with the old assets and you deal with the old problems, the old pollution. Of course, we know the issues are many with that, and also the costs. And I think it can be really hard for people to develop the budgets and the case to do the investments and deal with the others that own the existing assets and those problems. That I would say this dynamic is something that's quite important to think about and understand.
Professor Xu Ming from the Michigan University. Professor Xu is an expert on environment protection. Professor Xu Ming, please raise your question.
Hi, thank you, and thank you both for the inspiring discussion. I'm from University of Michigan. I'm an environmental scientist. I'm working on the part of my work is on the food, energy, water nexus. So I feel just even though we have a lot of solutions and pathways to go forward, but it's like a whack-a-mole game. You solve this problem, there's another one comes up, you solve that one, and then a third one comes up. It got me thinking whether there's an end for this this problem. So I'm sure everybody saw SpaceX was launched a couple of weeks ago took 2 astronauts to the space station. And then Elon Musk said something on Twitter a while ago. He said something like, open your eyes, look up, right? So that got me thinking, maybe we have been talking a lot about what's going on Earth and what we can do here in our home. But maybe looking up, see what's happening, what's possible out there in space, in other planets. That might be another solution. But I haven't heard any people working in the sustainability area talking about that at all. It might be a crazy idea, it might be not feasible. I want to just throw it out there and see what you guys think. Thank you.
Well, if I may comment on that, while one can admire what Elon Musk has done in terms of electric cars and creating space rockets, I think there is a big danger that both he and others create this notion that in order to save the planet and create a secure future, we need big solutions that we don't have now. Like this whole idea of moving mankind to Mars, for example. But the fact of the matter is we have all the solutions. We have the existing technologies. Even more than 10 years ago in Abu Dhabi, we inaugurated Masdar City, which was built on the principle of zero waste, zero emission. We now have the technology to build cities with no pollution and to use all the waste. And we need to realize the solutions are already here. They are already here. And secondly, we need to realize that each and every one of us can execute them. We don't have to wait for big governments or big companies to execute them. The beauty of the technological revolution in both clean energy and information technology and others is that each and every one of us can execute these solutions. So while, like everybody else, being fascinated by SpaceX, the important message is the solutions already exist. We don't have to wait. We don't have to go to outer space. And I also, to illustrate my point more, I had a problem with Bill Gates coming to the Paris Climate Conference and giving a huge amount of money together with others for those who could create big technological solutions to the climate problem in the future. And the message of this was we have to wait. We have to wait until there's a big technological solution. But the fact of the matter is we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait. So while I understand your question, I say to you, don't just stand there and look up to space and wait for something to come from heaven. Start executing the change here now, because you already have the power and the technology to do so.
Yeah, I echo those comments. I also want to comment on space a little bit because think about this from a perspective of from biology. Every organism is optimized to survive in a very specific environment, including us and everything around us. And when you look at the human body, for example, we have 10 times more microbial DNA in our body than human DNA, microbes, bacteria, just that alone. The reason is because we have a complex ecosystem in our own bodies that's interacting around us. When you go out to space, none of our bodies or our ecosystems around us were optimized to live in that environment. So we are going into the most hostile environment that we could possibly go into. As an exploration of human potential, as asking questions, why are we here? What is beyond Earth? This is fascinating. This is very relevant. But we shouldn't be combining our curiosity about our own existence with the question about our survival in this way. I mean, what it really should be doing, we can a little bit, because what it should be doing is it should be helping us to realize what a special planet Earth is. Just look at our neighbors, Venus or Mars. I mean, these are very uninhabitable planets for us, and they're our neighbors. So they suggest that if we continue to do certain things on Earth, we might end up a little bit like our neighbors. We can't find another planet like Earth anywhere within reach. This is a very special planet, and we've been very specially evolved to survive on it. Compared to exploring other planets and figuring out how to live there, it's a lot easier to just get a few more things right here on Earth. We're so close to getting it right, actually, when you think about the challenge in having a viable human life in space or another planet. You asked about the end state. I just wanted to say that. I think part of our challenge is that we feel if we make some changes, we end up with something not as good as what we have now. But I think that's actually totally incorrect. And President Grímsson, coming from Iceland, is again a very good example of this. Where we end up with is abundant energy. If we get green energy rolled out more and more across the planet, as is the case in Iceland, we'll have more energy than we know what to do with at no cost to the environment, at no cost to our ecosystems. We're not burning more fuel to get it. It exists because the wind is turning and the sun is shining, natural processes. And then we can ask ourselves, how much more food can we produce for our planet, for people who need it? I mean, food export is what everyone does. The US exports food to China. It's just happening all over the planet. We should be exporting more food to Africa, to South Asia, and vice versa. They should be, I mean, we can do that with energy that we produce because we can grow food more and more productively in, for example, greenhouses. We end up in a world of abundant energy. We have so many applications that can improve human life, including maybe even flying with electric power without affecting our environment, or noise, and going faster than we do with cars. There's so many things we can do. So I would say, let's focus on improving life here. Let's not confuse that with a fascinating exploration of other planets, which is part of humanity. That's part of what we can do, and it pushes our science. And let's also envision how just implementing, as President Grímsson said, the technologies in front of us, we can actually have totally new realities where, for example, we have abundant energy.
Okay, thanks, Professor Xu, President Grímsson, David. Because we have quite a lot of questions, so maybe you have to do quick questions and quick answers. We still have a long list of experts. Next, I'd like to invite Professor Zhang Lixiao from Beijing University, from Beijing Normal University School of Environment. Professor Zhang Lixiao, please. And Professor Zhu Haifeng, please get prepared.
Thank you. Very inspiring talks. I have a short question for David. You mentioned the AI technology will help to increase the production efficiency. My question actually is on the consumer side. Sometimes we face the problems of the shortage. Sometimes we face the problem of the overeating. So, as the leading company in the world, do you have some plan to use the AI technology to help direct the responsible consumption For instance, to design some of the games to help the guide consumer into a responsible consumption behavior. That's my question. Thank you.
AI can optimize anything. So I think the first step would be to agree, what is a healthy diet? And then you need to have sensors to tell you, what you've been eating. So what is a very convenient way of keeping track of what you've been eating? And you could have a very easy, this is, I don't know of an application that does this now or a company that does this, but this could be a great idea for a startup. What you would do is, if you could agree on what a healthy diet is, and you could have a method for an application to continuously guide you to say, towards the ideal diet. So you have to know what your target is. You have to get data coming in from sensors. Maybe it's just a camera on a smartphone or other methods. Maybe it's something you wear on your wrist. There's many different ways of getting sensors to apply data. And then you would just be instructed throughout the day, don't eat this, stop eating this. That's your 4th hamburger of the day. That's too much. And by doing that, if you could actually reduce this problem of overconsumption, you're going to have a positive impact on human health. And you probably, over the long term, across larger populations, you may have a positive impact on the planet. So I think it's entirely possible. And these are the kinds of companies that we want to encourage to grow up, companies that are good for your health and also good for the environment. So I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Next, I'd like to invite Professor Zhu Haifeng from China Academy of Sciences. I think you have already seen his image with very unique beard. This is his trademark. The reason why he with this kind of beard is because he spent most of his time to do scientific research on glaciers in the third pole, as President Grímsson mentioned. So, Professor Zhu, please raise your question. Thank you.
Dear President, thank you for the helpful dialogue. So we all know in the third pole area, glacier melting water is very important to the downstream people living. So especially in the Pakistan or some other arid areas. But different countries may have different policies, as they are also different in richness. So my question is how to face the possible problems in water resources due to retreating glaciers on this regional scale. Thank you.
It is unfortunate that in the third pole Himalayan region, we do not have systematic cooperation between India, China, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, or the other countries. And that is why I have made various efforts to bring the third pole countries, the Himalayan countries, together. I have sometimes said we have an Arctic table. It didn't exist 25 years ago, but we created an Arctic table where America, Russia, Canada, the Nordic countries sit together, and we have also invited China, India, Korea, Singapore, and others to sit at that table and observe our discussion on the glacier and the ice in the Arctic. So both India and China sit at the Arctic table, but there is no Himalaya table. There is no third pole table. So that is why we have made a lot of effort. I have spoken about that in China. I have spoken about that in India. We have created sessions at the Arctic Circle. We even organized a conference in Dehradun in India. And next year, we will have a conference in Abu Dhabi, hosted by the Arctic Circle and the government of the UAE, to talk about what are the lessons from the Arctic that the Himalayan countries can learn. A few months ago, I spoke with your new Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister of Pakistan. And he expressed a strong interest in Pakistan coming into this discussion. We have also invited Bangladesh. And some years ago, I organized a meeting in Bhutan in cooperation with His Majesty the King and the government of Bhutan. So maybe it needs somebody from outside, like myself. I mean, I don't have any military interest in the Himalayas. I don't have any economic interest in the Himalayas. I don't even exist in the Himalayan region. So maybe the situation is such that Pakistan, India, China, Nepal, Bhutan need an outsider, need somebody to come in, somebody with no more ulterior motives, no interest, to bring them together at the table. We all know about the difficulties between Pakistan and India. Bhutan and China don't even have diplomatic relationships. So it is very difficult to bring the Himalayan third pole countries together. That is why I am using the Arctic example to say to the countries in the third pole Himalayan regions, you need a third pole circle, like we have the Arctic Circle. You need a third pole table, like we have the Arctic table. And I think we will get there. And maybe start successfully with a meeting in Abu Dhabi, because I think it is very interesting that the Arctic Circle and the government of the United Arab Emirates are coming together and saying to Pakistan, India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and the others, come to this new table. And we invite all of our friends in the third pole countries, including China, to attend.
Okay, thanks. Next, I will invite Professor Zhang Yumei from China Academy of Agricultural Science. She is an expert on food issues. Professor Zhang, please.
Thank you so much for invitation to participate in the important high-level dialogue. I'm excited to hear that Tencent set fuel as one of strategies. It's really important global issue. I believe artificial intelligence can play a great potential role in agriculture and help to achieve sustainable development. My question is how to enhance the cooperation among different stakeholders, such as the pioneer artificial intelligence companies like Tencent and the public sectors, such as universities and research institutes, to tackling field challenges around the world. Thank you.
Well, I think there's many things we can do, both in China and around the world. I find it so it really depends how. As you know, we have many aspects of our business, like our cloud business sometimes has specific solutions that they can provide. And in the area of agriculture, you have outdoor agriculture, which can involve everything from like satellite imaging to help you forecast the productivity in fields, to actual plant health applications outdoors. And then you have things like what I was referring to earlier, artificial intelligence for greenhouses. What's really helpful as a business, though, and I think it's not just Tencent, I think all businesses are guilty of this, is that we respond to demand. So the problem with these climate challenges is sometimes we can identify that the world has a need before people know that they have the need. Okay, well, so what do I mean? If you could say the world is facing a water crisis, if you use that term, some people didn't know that. They didn't know that their water was polluted or their city was running out of water. They didn't know they had a demand for clean water. They just thought clean water is always coming out of the taps, or it's always going to be there. It's always been there, it'll always be there. So if we as a company start thinking about a problem that people haven't recognized yet, we kind of take a little bit of a risk in a way, because we're confident that this is an important issue. Then we put it out there for the public, for researchers or decision makers. And then we may not get a positive response, even though we may have been right about the issue. If we say that we think the planet has a water security crisis on Earth, that means some parts of the world don't have enough water, some parts have too much, some places the water's polluted. If people don't respond positively to that message, then as a company, because we're so sensitive to market demand, we may incorrectly presume that maybe there isn't so much demand out there. So we might decide to work on other problems. If we say we have a solution, AI for something, AI for water, and we go to water utilities around China or other parts of the world, and nobody wants it, we might say, look, this product has failed. We should work on something else. But the reason it failed may not be because of an accurate understanding by the stakeholders of the severity of the problem, the depth of the challenge. So just imagine this as an example, totally different. Can you imagine me giving speeches in China in November or December about the challenge of infectious disease, viruses? It's not going to be the most popular speech. And in fact, some people probably would prefer to think about something else. Who wants to hear a speech about viruses, this challenge that awaits us around the corner? And here we are around the world, entire population of Earth, somehow in various ways being affected by this COVID-19. So we as a company could go out there with a very strong message saying we need to do something about this issue, and the market may not respond to us very favorably. And then you have to wait for something really big and bad to happen to then show that the ideas had value. I think, therefore, it's important that we have more dialogues with scientists like yourself, researchers, decision makers, be they in the, a water utility, whether that's a private business or government run, to continuously talk about the challenges and be there to support each other, not just, financially, but also intellectually, with the work you're doing, to be aware of those problems, to have the kind of discussions we're having today, so we can feel confident as society and as experts that we're tackling the right challenges. And we can also alert others in the society that are less aware that this is an important challenge that that require investment to solve, because ultimately there's always an investment. Someone needs to adopt a solution or build something new, or to use some new software from a Tencent kind of company. So I think the first step is really working together to identify challenges, and then getting more faster market validation to reward companies who try to address the risk with solutions. Because if we don't hear any market demand or market appreciation, as a company very sensitive to market feedback, we may misinterpret the signal as being that we're not developing the right product or we're not focused on the right problem, when the real problem was there weren't enough people aware of the issue or talking about it. So that would be my answer to you.
Okay, actually we are running out of time. It's almost 2 hours, so I don't think I can hijack President Grímsson and David for too much time. So I think we still have maximum 3 questions there from media. So let's do it quick questions and quick answers. Okay. So the first one is from the Fortune China. 财富中文网, please raise your question. Just be concise.
Hello.
简短一点, 好吧?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. My question is, I heard is talking about technologies. Is that technology the only way to save all the problems, the water problems, the pollution problems, and what can we do beyond technologies? That's my question. It's very short. I think we are facing the challenges right now. Okay, thank you for both of you. Sorry? I'm sorry?
President Grímsson, you want to take that one?
No, I think you should do that, yeah.
Well, I think, so part of my job as a CXO is I actually don't even just like to focus on technology. I focus on next generation technology, the new stuff, the stuff that is coming right out of the lab, or something that's a breakthrough. But you're right, there's so much we can do. I mean, if you think about roughly 10 to 20% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from agriculture, as an example. Mm-hmm. But most of that is coming from meat, and a lot of it comes from cows. So you could address the greenhouse gas emissions problem just by, if the planet was to eat less beef, maybe you go from having beef at every meal to once a week or once a day. Anything you would do like that could have a huge impact. And I think to address that, we develop content. So we talk about these issues like we're doing now. We might do speeches. We might support certain initiatives, videos or movies, or books, writing. I think you're making a very big point, and that is that so much can be done just by changing human behavior. And that is probably the most powerful lever we have at the end of the day, to be aware of how our actions affect the environment, and then being willing to make some changes to what we do every day. So I think this is actually really important, and I would want to emphasize that. It's just as important as embracing the new technology.
Right, thank you. So you mean
Okay.
the changing? Okay.
Okay, next, the National Business Daily. 每日经济新闻 ，Please raise your question.
大家好，我是来自本日新闻的杜恒峰。我有一个问题，就是新冠疫情控制住的话，需要全球共识才能算真正的胜利。所以，你认为发达国家可以做些什么，可以帮助一些发展中国家，比如说像印度，比如像巴西或者是非洲国家控制疫情，并且能够解决粮食短缺的问题？还有一个就是，在疫情期间呢，一些国家，比如像南亚和东南亚上一些国家，对一些粮食出口进行了一些限制，导致一些说粮食价格上涨的情况，甚至引发一些市民抢购的问题。我想问一下，像世界粮食组织这样的国际组织怎么去协调这个问题，保证世界粮食的安全 ？Thank you.
Okay, let me try to summarize as quickly as possible. In the context of COVID-19, what can developed countries do to help those developing or underdeveloped countries to fight against like food shortage, something like this? And another question is that in the context of the pandemic, what can like international organization like International Food and Agriculture Organization can do to help the world? Yeah.
I think it's very difficult to map out in great detail what you would do in many other countries. What we have seen in the last 2 or 3 months is that each and every country finds a way that suits its social traditions, its political system, its information system. We in Iceland, for example, we have been able to deal with this very successfully. But when it started in March, we were not so sure. But we were able to be very innovative in the way we solved this and how we brought people together. And we didn't order people by law or by military power. We appealed to the inner wisdom of people. So the lesson of Iceland and maybe New Zealand as well, these are the 2 most successful countries in dealing with this, is you have to trust the people and engage the population in the solution. And that is something you need to apply to other countries as well, that the strongest force is to mobilize the people themselves. We saw that in China as well. You saw a national effort that mobilized the Chinese population. So whereas technology can help, whereas medical science can help, it is still about people. All the solutions to these big problems have to mobilize the people, because without cooperation from each and every individual, we are not going to succeed. So to believe too strongly that technology will solve the problem is perhaps not the best way forward. I have full respect to what technology can offer, but it is still fundamentally about people.
Maybe there are still many questions, but actually we are running out of time. And huge thanks to President Grímsson and to David. Hope you can join Tencent Dialogue next time. And thanks to our online experts and audience. Thanks very much for our supporting team of Tencent Dialogue here. I think as we discussed, the solution to the problems requires not only the technologies, but also the cooperation of various parties, including the government, enterprises, civil society, and even you and me. I think we are on the way. This is Tencent Dialogue with President Ólafur Grímsson and the former President of Iceland, and Mr. David Wallerstein, Chief Exploration Officer of Tencent. This is Samtai from Tencent Research Institute. This is all for today. See you next time in Tencent Dialogue. Bye-bye. Bless. Au revoir.